Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Bobby Marlab, the co-founder of Mental Walks with Adina Jacobs, and we're delighted tonight to bring you the conversation series that we partner with the Iconic and thank them for their support. Before we enter this great conversation, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people and pay my deepest respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to all First Nations people all over Australia. I'm delighted tonight to be inviting Aliza Knox into conversation with us about her book, Don't Give Up Your Day Job. Aliza is a new friend in my world. We met at the launch of her book in Sydney, and it was that launch that gave me the background to ask her to have dinner and discuss becoming the local leader for Mental Walks in Singapore, which she does brilliantly along with Belinda Pervin. So we're very grateful for the support you're giving women and women in Singapore, Aliza. Thank you very much. Aliza has had a really wonderful career that has spanned the US, Singapore and Australia and some other places as well, I'm sure. She has run the Asian operations for Twitter and Cloudflare. She's had stints at Google, at Boston Consulting Group, and she sits also on a number of boards, including listed boards in Australia and beyond. So there are a few people better to talk about the working place and particularly workplaces that were early to tech than Aliza. So Aliza, welcome and thanks for being in conversation with us today.
Thanks for having me on. This is really fantastic. I have loved every way in which I've been able to connect with the Mentor Walks community. We had a walk, our first anniversary walk in Singapore just last week, and things are really going well here, and it's a great way to be able to interact and give back.
Thank you. So let's get into it and let's talk about your book, Don't Give Up Your Day Job. So we start by just give us, in your own words, an overview of your career and why you wrote the book and also why you called it what you have.
Sure. Well, so there's a lot packed in there, but I'll make it as brief as I can. Having been in tech most recently, I have learned to think of my career as a series of software upgrades. So 1.0 was Boston Consulting Group and financial services like Charles Schwab and Visa. Then I pivoted to tech and ran a good part of the Google operations in Asia, and then went to run Twitter and Cloudflare. So that was 2.0. Then during COVID, when I was in Singapore and our kids were not, and travel was really limited, and my kids are young adults, so it's not really a disaster, but it felt like I wanted to have a bit more flexibility, a bit more freedom. I'd worked for almost exactly 40 years. That seemed like a good time to try something new. So I moved to 3.0, which is what I'm in now. So the fancy name for it is portfolio career. The probably more realistic one is trying to figure out what to do when I grow up. So one of the things I thought I might do is write a book. It seems to be, a good idea on a lot of people's bucket lists. And the way I came to the book, which is called Don't Quit Your Day Job, and I'll come to the title in a minute, but really it's more about the subtitles. The subtitle, which is 6 Mind Shifts to Rise and Thrive, is that I spend a lot of time going for coffee with people who want to talk about their careers. I guess this all happened before I knew about Mentor Walks. So I'm trying to do more as walking conversations, but still in the middle of the day in Singapore, you tend not to want to go out and walk and talk. So we sit in cafes, and this is problematic for 2 reasons. One, I don't like coffee. So I have learned to drink like very weak decaf latte to seem adult, but frankly, for anyone on this call who knows me, I much prefer Diet Dr. Pepper where I can find it. And second of all, if you've been in tech, you know that these one-on-one meetings are not scalable. And in fact, what you and Adina have done with Mentor Walks is amazing because it's kind of a bridge between getting some one-on-one attention, but actually a program that's more scalable. But I thought, having not met you yet, you know what, maybe I'll write a book, because although each coffee meeting or walk is very individual and each person is unique, a lot of the themes that come up are the same. And I thought maybe if I packaged them and wrote about it, I could share with more people than I can manage to get to in conversation. So that was the genesis of the book. It is mostly stories. I'd say there's a little more than 36 stories, probably 60% women, 40% men, many nationalities, heavily Asia and heavily tech because of my background, but other parts of the world, other industries, medical, education as well. Just trying to maybe provide something that's really readable, that has maybe a nugget that's relevant for each person who reads it, right now, and maybe something else that sticks in their brain for 5 months, 5 years from now, where they think, aha, I can use that idea that I read. So that's the purpose, a little bit of a way of giving back. And just to finish off, in the spirit of giving back, although the author's royalties are tiny, I have committed that they will go to something called Vital Voices, which is an NGO out of Washington, D.C., but it's global, and it basically funds women into positions of policymaking power. So this could be elected officials, appointed officials, but globally to try to ensure things like gender pay equity, enough funding for childcare, and other things that support women in the workplace and actually just in the social sphere.
Fantastic. So many people believe they'll come to an either-or moment, as in work or personal life, that they've got to make a choice between the two, and that it's impossible to have both a fulfilling career and a fulfilling personal life. But you believe something different, and you talk about something called being on the same team. Can you talk to us about this notion and what you mean by that, and how that problem presents from women?
Sure. Well, I guess the most common way it presents to me is that somebody says, I'm having kids, I got to leave work, or I can't do this job anymore. I think there are lots of variations on it. I don't like, I've really stayed away from using that term work-life balance, because it says to me, it's like a seesaw, or I think in Australia, they call it teeter-totter. I'm not sure the right word.
Seesaw's good.
Seesaw. But, if work is good, then your life is bad. Or if life is good, then somehow your work isn't as good. And to me, that seems ridiculous. And clearly, there are only so many hours in a day. Personally, I've been applying for more hours a day, but it just doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. And so you can't do, I don't think you can be an Olympic swimmer and have 3 young kids at home and be a chief executive and get 8 hours of sleep and, do a lot of crocheting and read 12 novels a week. Like, there are some limits, but I think people can do more than they think. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that I think for many things, there are diminishing marginal returns. Great concept I learned in consulting, but a lot of people learn in college or high school these days, or MBA, which is that you think, I'm going to sit at my desk 1 more hour, or I'm going to spend 1 more hour on dinner to, make the lettuce leaves look perfect or something. And oftentimes those extra hours or 2 are actually much better spent doing something else that you really care about, that not only doesn't have diminishing marginal returns, but gives you energy for other things. So I'll give an example in a minute. But because of that, a lot of the book is about reminding people that they need to do things that they care about, that give them energy. And those things are usually the ones that are fulfilling. So I'll give an example in a minute. And then I also want to talk about whether work can fulfill all your passions. So one of the first examples for me, I don't think I wrote about this in the book, but I did write about Susie Nicoletti in the book, and she, it's public. She lives in Australia. She was running Twitter, and she has been now running an Israeli startup called Yotpo in Asia. But when I tried to hire her from Google to Twitter, she said, well, I'm really sorry, I can't, because I want to start having kids. And so I said, well, I think you can do both. I managed to do both. I know I may not be perfect at it, but I have always had a full-time career and have had 2 kids at home. And I have spent a lot of money on childcare, getting help around that, whether that be daycare or people to come at night. And so, you have to decide that you're willing to do that. If you want the freedom to not have to rush home from work at 5, or maybe that's something you can manage. And I did convince her to come across and try it. And that one was just more saying, listen, you know me as a person, you can try it. If it doesn't work out, I'm not going to hold you to this if you really feel you can't do it. And of course, she went from having no kids to 3 kids and starting at Twitter, not running it, and ending up running the entire operation and then moving to running Asia for Yacht Post. So there's a good story with more in the book about how she was able to do it. I think the other reason they're on the same team, I'll give an example of Cindy Carpenter, whom both you and I know, and probably a lot of people on this call know. So I met Cindy originally at BCG. She did a number of things and then became an entrepreneur running a business called Cast. And she, I think around 10 years ago, I can't be exact, and because she's trekking in Iceland on a sabbatical right now, she is not on this call to correct me, but she had really been following Australia's approach to immigration and to new Australians, and was pretty unhappy, as many people are, with, the detention on Nauru, the way we were integrating people as they came in, and she decided she wanted to do something about it. And she's involved in a number of groups, but one of the ways she decided to invest her time in this was to go on the board of and become chair of the Bread and Butter Project. And for those of you who like sourdough bread and haven't bought any bread from Bread and Butter Project, I highly recommend you go. The number of outlets, many are Woolies now. And the great thing about that organization is that, and it's a tremendous way for them to come into Australia, be part of the community. I, for example, met one of the managers who is a Syrian math teacher. He will ultimately get his requalifications. I think Lauren, sorry, somebody was not on mute. Get his requalifications and be able to teach in Australia, but at the moment, or at the time I met him, he couldn't. Anyway, she became deeply involved there, probably half of her time on the immigration issue. And it really fulfilled a lot of passions for her, so much so she's been called to Parliament because she's so good at it. She's been asked to speak to people about it. So not only has she been able to have this kind of work-life balance, because that's something that really means something to her, but because she has become so well known for this and other things she is doing for new Australians, that she's gotten business in the business that she runs day to day, because people said, hey, I've heard about you with this. I know it's not really relevant to what you're doing, but it seems, your perspective seems interesting. Your style seems interesting. I'd like to ask you about, actually doing business with you in the business you run day to day. So I think there are lots of examples where making that trade-off to spend time on the other doesn't mean that you can't have a fulfilling work, fulfill your work in your life at the same time. I guess I know I'm going on about this, but one last thing I'd say is that I do think a challenge for particularly younger people is that somehow, I don't know, even I'm not old enough to have been around at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but, we had something where they said, come off the farms, go to an assembly line, make some stuff. We'll give you some money. You can buy food and rent a place. And then it was like, well, you want to learn on the job, and you want your job to be fulfilling. And we want companies to have a mission. And I think that can be really inspiring. But then we got to this stage of like, your work should fulfill all your passions. And I think for some people that is possible, but for others it might not be. And they find a way to do more than one thing. I mean, Bobby, I don't know if you want to comment, but I look at what you do. You run this amazingly successful business. And you also must have a passion around mentoring, because look at the time. And Adina, same thing. You're both entrepreneurs, and you've both put a lot of time into mentor walks, I think, to fulfill a passion you have about giving back.
Look, absolutely. And I always have a problem with the term work-life balance, because I think there is no such thing. And I think it sets people up for failure to think that there is something that you can be in balance. And I think what happens throughout your career, certainly the needs that you have when your kids are small or when you've got other caring responsibilities, is the scales go like this. And actually, what we all need is flexibility to work out what we need at that point of time. And so I'm deviating a bit from the way you can structure your working life to work on things that really matter to you. But I'm talking more about the general idea that we can have everything in balance. And I really think that sets everyone up for failure. And it's a bit like happiness. Happiness comes in fleeting moments. But what you're looking for more probably is it's more achievable to find contentedness, right?
Yeah.
And I see that really about the work-life balance, that you're trying to get it into some manageable state, but there's never going to be the perfect state because everything changes. And if you think about the needs of your job, sometimes it demands more of you, sometimes less. With your family or caring responsibilities, kids at different stage, different types of time with you. So I really do think flexibility is the key to those sorts of questions. And then, of course, it's the bit about what really, as you say, gives you energy. And often that energy comes from being involved in things that are actually helping other people. And I certainly, when you're talking about Cindy or my own experience with mentor walks, it's the idea that you're making a contribution to lifting another group of people up that I think can be very satisfying. And that can happen in all sorts of big and small ways. I know that when my kids were small, it was flipping burgers at their sporting events because I could do it while it was there and I could contribute. It doesn't have to be on a gigantic scale. It's about doing what you can when you can do it. And I think that's a different way to frame it as well.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't always have to be giving back. I mean, I think a lot of us like to give back, but we also have, selfish needs. Like I like to go to the gym. I want to learn mahjong, and those are things that give me energy. I know an INSEAD professor who is an avid equestrian and polo player. And, I don't know how many careers there are in doing that. I'm sure there are some, but maybe not enough for all the people I've met who like riding horses, which doesn't include me. I think I'm a bit scared of them. But, she's a professor and she's an academic. She loves it. She loves the interaction with the students. She's published a number of books. She's really well known in her field, but she also uses this career to make enough money to have long vacations at summer and winter break and be able to go somewhere where they have horses and she can ride. She has a family as well, but there are different ways I think to do this, to find this way to make it work that you can have a career and can have stuff outside of it. And I really hate to see people trying to give up all of the other, because I think it drains them rather than giving them energy.
Yeah, I love the analogy that when you think about when you get on an airplane, they say if the oxygen masks come down, put it on yourself first. And I think self-care is really important, and doing things for yourself is really important. And it speaks to your point about what gives you energy, and it can be all those kind of things. Aliza, I just want to shift the conversation to a little bit to the issue of stamina. Which is enormously important. And, our careers go for a long time. And I think it's a particularly important issue right now when there are a lot of redundancies, people are thinking about career change, and many other sort of changes in their working world. Can you talk to us a bit about your view on stamina and also some of the stumbling blocks and other issues you see confronting people in their careers?
Sure. So one of the 6 mind shifts in the book is stamina as a muscle, work on building yours. And I wrote an equation, which I'm hoping will make me as famous as Einstein, but somehow I think I might be overreaching. So especially having just seen Oppenheimer, it seems like equations, that'd be great. But it's stamina equals perseverance plus enthusiasm. Because I think, there's been a lot written about grit and Angela Duckworth is obviously far more erudite than I am, but and I think it's really important. And I'm not saying that grit just means grinding it out, but I think there is some idea for people at times that stamina means just hanging in there. And I don't think it does. It means deciding to stay for a while and having an attitude that makes it pleasant for you until it is no longer pleasant. And the reason I talk about it a lot is there are stumbling points. And I feel that a lot of people think, okay, well, I need to leave now. And I'm going to give you two stories where that wasn't important. I think sometimes you might need to leave if there's really something unfair going on, if HR won't deal with it, if it's illegal, if it's harassment. That's well beyond, my ability to discuss what should happen. You need to go and get outside help. But I think there are times that people maybe misinterpret what's happening in their company, and it's worth sticking around or thinking through for their careers. So one example is a disguised person named Barbara, who told me a number of years ago that she had to leave this tech firm because she was being layered over. She was in her late 20s. She was head of sales. They were bringing in somebody over her. It was demoralizing, demeaning, absolutely had to go. And the reason they'd asked me to talk to her is I knew I wasn't in the same company, but I knew the person who was coming to be her boss. And I said, hey, this guy he's really known for his leadership skills, for developing people. And I know age and experience aren't everything, but he's 15, maybe 20 years older than you are, and he has a lot to offer. You might want to stay. You might want to kind of just decide that even though you're offended, it's worth hanging in there, even though you feel you're being demeaned. And, in this particular case, she was reporting directly to the CEO of a fast growth startup. So she was getting no instruction, no learning. I mean, the title felt good, but there was no one to actually help her. And in the end, I'm sure not completely due to my guidance, she stayed, and she stayed for 6 years. And she got 2 promotions while she was there. She really got along well with her boss. I think she did learn a lot. Second time she got promoted, she was out on maternity leave, which I think should be neither here nor there. But I think it's actually, unfortunately, still worth mentioning that was how good she was and how good the relationship was that they had built. And now she's the chief revenue officer at a Series D firm that would have gone public, if we hadn't had the tech downturn that we have today. And my view is that without the stamina to stick around, to just kind of say, okay, I'm going to try, even though it's not what I want and not what I like and not what I think I deserve, but I'm going to test it. She would have just kept being head of sales at various sort of Series A companies. She's smart, she's good, she would have been hired, but she would have kept being in a situation where she didn't really have anybody to learn from. Another example is another young woman I know who is an engineer in a much larger kind of tech firm, and she had felt very hard done by with her manager. She went to HR. They couldn't fix the situation. The manager seemed to, I've only heard one side of it, like not be taking her seriously, criticizing her, not giving her actionable feedback. And so she called me up to get help about leaving the firm. And I was like, this company you work for is really, really big, right? Like we're talking 100,000 people big. She's like, yeah. I was like, so why do you have to leave? Oh, my manager has said terrible things about me. I'm like, okay, but you're at sort of an entry level +1 position, and he's at an entry level +2. So I don't think everybody in that firm knows your manager. So he probably, although it seems horrible to you, and I know you have this in your head, he probably hasn't told everybody in this enormous firm what he thinks of you. And even if he has, maybe they don't care. So we went back and thought about, like, listen, you were there for 2 summers before you joined out of university. So there you have 2 allies in that firm, or supporters, advocates, who wanted you to come back. I said, do you have any others? And she said, well, yes, there'd been this offsite where she met somebody where they'd really bonded and had something in common outside of work and had built a good relationship there. So I said, so, should we think about writing to those 3 people and just saying, or reaching out to them, however is comfortable for you, saying, I think I'm in kind of an untenable position at this company. I really like the company and I want to stay, but I'm having difficulty getting out of my role. And I don't think I can stay here. And she did that. And within a month, she had 2 alternative offers, one of which she took, and she's very happily at that company. So that was part of my sort of stamina and don't quit your day job. It doesn't always mean don't quit, but a lot of times I think people forget that they have options. And, it's often easier to stay at a company where you've already proven yourself, if things are going well, and find some workarounds, than to leave, which is destabilizing, and you have to prove yourself again. So I'm not saying always stay. I quit to write the book, so I'm not a good example. But I think having that stamina enables you to go through some of these junctures where you think it's so unpleasant that you have to go. But there are actually other ways to deal with things.
Yeah. And I think also sometimes there's a conventional way of operating that you get a progression that you have to leave and go somewhere else. And in what I've seen, that's not the case either, that's something to question as well, because often that progression can be within the place that you are.
Right. I think a lot of people kind of over focus on promotion, and, a lot of us are high achievers and would like to have that, but sometimes a lateral move where you get to learn a lot that might serve you later, or geographic move where you get exposed to a different culture that may or may not come with, a bigger title or more money right at the moment. They often really help you build your career. And if you think more broadly about just curiosity and learning, they can be great things to do. And especially now, you were talking about, there are layoffs at the moment. It looks like we might have a recession. So it's a good time for people to think about how they can keep learning, and maybe not being fixated completely on title. I'm not saying, always take a lower job if you're out of a job, or, work for half as much money as you think you're worth. Not at all. But it might be a good time to be more flexible in thinking about, where can you get benefit in terms of learning or challenges that may not be exactly the path you thought you were on originally.
That's right. And lateral moves can often be good moves because, as you say, they expose you to something different, learning. And also sometimes it's the potential to really stand out in an organization because you've taken a project or a particular area on. And it may not look like a step up, but it actually turns out to be because of what you learn and the exposure you get. So it's an interesting one. Can we talk a little bit now about your views on hard work and also how that relates to, building and maintaining relationships in your career and, what makes for a successful career? Is it just about hard work or is it about the relationships you build? Talk to us about all of that.
Sure. Well, I think that maybe in certain jobs, if you're like a research scientist and you develop something that gives you a Nobel Prize, I still presume you have to work with other scientists. I'm certainly not on that path, but I think it might be more of an individual contributor kind of role. But in the businesses that I've worked in, which are mostly mid to large corporates, I think a lot of your success in accomplishing goals, getting things done, working with clients, building a brand has to do with how you relate to other people. And so I think working hard is really important, but I also think building relationships is really important. And it's a little bit harder right now that we're doing more remote work, I think. I'm probably a bit of a Luddite. I really am hoping that we, I guess, settle into some pattern where there is definitely more flexibility about being home or being somewhere else when we work, but that we do go into shared workspaces at various times, because I think there are lots of serendipitous moments, hallway meetings that lead to insights and collaboration that we don't get on Zoom. So I believe really strongly in the relationship part. And I think a lot of it comes from not being afraid to ask other people for help, like not all the time, not Bobby, can you do my work, please? I want to go play badminton, but more, I know that you know this about how to serve a client. This is my first time working with a large financial institution. Can you give me some hints? You might do that for me. Maybe I, help you out again later. I think the value of saying thank you is highly underrated. I think people forget. I've written a Forbes article about it. I wrote it in the book. I don't mean walking around saying thank you to everybody all the time, or in some obsequious way, but people do you a favor at work. Why not? I mean, one great thing is to write a note thanking them for going the extra mile and copying their boss. You look good. It helps the person. You get to know more people around. I have this goofy habit that I'm not necessarily recommending because it'll probably just seem like me, but everybody can have their own. I walk around Asia buying really kitsch things off my own budget, not company stuff. So it's got a really small budget per item, like $2. So really, really for that, like a really tacky kangaroo keychain from Australia, or little elephant candles from Cambodia. And when somebody somewhere does me a favor, I write a quick handwritten note on a sticky pad and mail it off. And they have this ridiculous thing from me that hopefully is at least somewhat funny, and definitely at no risk of being seen as an inappropriate gift of trying, bribery or whatever, saying thank you. And they remember I've got like sumo wrestling handkerchiefs and Guatemalan worry dolls, and just, it's fun. And so I think, and then, the in-person stuff, those times that you spill coffee on somebody, or miss a plane together, or I actually, in early days at BCG, was working on diamonds for Argyle diamond mining, and another guy and I went to Oklahoma, and the cab that we were in ran over my leg. Fortunately, I wasn't too badly hurt. And the cab was called Smiley Cab. It had a little, the receipt was a yellow smiley face, like the irony of it. And, Paul and I talk about that to this day. Those kind of bonded experiences where you have something silly, or maybe not too good, but hopefully not fatal, that binds you together and leads to you working together. And I think that all those kinds of things help. I also think, in a more serious note, you need to learn how to influence people. I think there are lots of books written about that. But if I think about the many foundational things I was taught about in consulting, you need to, when you're wanting a big decision made, a lot of it is presenting clear data and facts so that you can get maybe everybody to a midway point that we at least agree these are the facts of the situation. You still have to make a decision on what to do. And a lot of the ability to influence people comes from finding a way to build a relationship. It doesn't even necessarily mean that we are friends or that we like each other, but we need to have some respect and the ability to work together and see each other's point of view. And so that's why I think, and especially, like, I've grown up professionally in pretty much only matrixed organizations. There's not always a clear boss, and you're going to committees. So if you haven't built these relationships to find a way to work together, it's very hard to get an outcome that you think you need.
Yeah, you've raised a lot of interesting thoughts. I know that at Mentor Walks, one of the things that has the most meaning for our mentors is when unexpectedly someone that they've mentored writes to them and tells them about the impact they've had. It might be 2 years later where, because of the conversation they had on a particular day, they made a certain, they changed their frame of mind, or approached something differently, or went for a new job that's had an impact. And I think that thing, it's not saying thank you, but it's telling someone the effect that they've had. And I think that often gets missed as well, because people, in my experience, don't expect it, but when they receive it, it makes an enormous difference. And I think that's an analogy to saying thank you to a colleague that you're working with, or whatever it is. And the other thing that you've made me think about is the whole issue about networking, because I think particularly for women, we think that networking is a dirty word. It means almost that you're going out to sell, that you're on the make. And I have a very different view of it. I think working is building your community, and it's just getting to know people and make connections out there, and who knows what will happen from those conversations. And reflecting on my own career, some of the best things that have happened to me are simply because I showed up somewhere. It was a chance conversation that led to an invitation that led to something else that's been a great thing in my world. And so I really think that idea about build your community and how important it is to show up. And it is harder in an online world, but magic happens when you do.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing you made me think of, I love, when people feedback to a mentor, the few times I've had somebody come back and say, I got this out of your book, or I did this. Of course, it makes you feel good, makes you even more. It's like a virtuous cycle of people wanting to pay it forward. So that's really important too. But I think the other thing you made me think of, online has its downsides, but the upside is it's so much easier now to stay in touch with people. You can just make a little bit of effort to like something that somebody you used to work with posted on LinkedIn, or congratulate them on a new job. Like, it's much easier to stay in touch with people, at least in some small way, than maybe it was 20 years ago. And I really like that because I've met all these people at work I like, and I'm not working with them anymore. Maybe some are going to come to me for help. Maybe I'm going to go to some for help. Today, I had a series of interactions where people wanted, backdoor references on people that I know. And that those relationships you build and then you keep up over time makes it easier for other people to help you too.
Yeah, that's lovely. So let's talk a little bit more about mentorship and really focus a little bit on people seeking out mentorship and help from other senior people. And what should be the kind of mental or thought model for the person who's seeking mentorship? What advice have you got for the people on this webinar about finding mentors and how to ask for help?
Okay, so I've got some very definite views on this.
Yeah, great.
Everything. I tend to have definite views, I suppose, but I'm changeable. They change. I take input and they change. So I think the word mentoring is somebody, it's someone who really kind of looks out for you, almost like a guardian, and it is a very big commitment. And I feel like it mostly happens organically. There's the occasional assignment of a mentor. So if someone volunteers, I'm not talking about mentor walks where, you've made it very clear. And I love what you and Adina have quoted as a kind of a high impact, low commitment mentoring, where you show up for an hour, and if you travel a lot, you don't come back for a couple months, you don't have ongoing obligations, but you can, stay in touch. So that's a different kind of mentoring. But like a lifelong mentor, I think it tends to happen organically, unless you've signed up for something either through work or like the Minerva program in Australia, which pairs businesswomen with athletes, or I was mentoring a young woman at the Asian University for Women, and Bobby knows all about this, who's Afghan, and it's turned into a lifelong mentoring for me because we had to get her out of Kabul and we're supporting her family, etc. So those are kind of really long commitments. And so if someone says to me, will you mentor me? I actually personally get pretty scared. I mean, I'm flattered, but I'm scared because I feel like I'm taking on a really big obligations. Most of the mentees that I have are people where it's happened organically. So Susie Nicoletti, who I mentioned before, is one, and it's just happened over the years. So I would never go to somebody and say, can you mentor me? Because I worry that, like me, it would make them actually go in the wrong direction. But it's good to have mentors, and I'll come back to what you do if you don't have one in a minute. I think the other thing is within work, you do need, I saw somebody typing, I can only see part of it in the chat button, but I saw the word advocate. You do need like advocates or supporters in your company if it's like more than two people, because someone somewhere has to stick their neck out and go, you know what? Aliza's up for promotion and I'm backing her. We're doing, in the tech firms, they call it calibration. There are this many people up for the next role. I'm backing Aliza because of blank, blank, blank. So you need that. And I think that is achieved mostly by merit in your job, or, performance in your job. People can see that you're delivering results, that you get along with other people at the company, but I don't see that as mentorship. I've had some mentors in my life, but not a lifelong one. So the thing I'm big on at the moment, which I did not invent, but have written quite a bit about, but you can Google it and read a lot about, is people building personal boards of directors. So it might be because I sit on boards and I like the idea. And for those of you, I'm sure lots of you or all of you know about corporate boards where there's, what we try to have. I suppose at some stage it was kind of like something to do while you were golfing, when you were an aging male who had some mates who had a business. But I think it's really gone well beyond that in most cases. It's still, not as gender equal as we'd like, but it's getting better, particularly in Australia. And what boards try to do, or sophisticated boards try to do, is have a matrix of skills that we need. We need somebody who really understands industrial relations or organizational design or the IT tech stack. We need people who really understand real estate or really understand e-commerce. And so you're trying to say, what are the real skills and areas of expertise that we need to guide this company? Well, why shouldn't each of us have that? Because even if I have a great mentor, somebody I've been with my whole life, it's only one person. So Susie was WhatsApping me last weekend about some stuff. And on some things I felt like, okay, here's some good advice. I have an idea. And on others, I said, you know what? Like, I don't think I can help. Like, I just don't know enough to give you an answer. I can make something up, but then I feel like I'm not the right guide. And so I'm sort of liking this idea that I came to very late in life of trying to build this of a few people who know you, but are distant enough to be a little bit dispassionate. So let me give you one example. And I see a couple people are writing in chat, and maybe you can look, Bobby, but I'm going to use Susie again. I'm sorry, but I just know that she's fine because she's Australian and a woman, and she's not on this talk, but she's like, we're very open about the relationship and things that are in the book. So she, at one point, before I really knew her, was working at Google and didn't get a promotion that she wanted. And she was really upset. And she was an individual salesperson. And all her friends said all the things that you want your supporters and friends to say. That's terrible, travesty of justice, you deserved it, you're going to get it next time, you rock, like hang in there, right? Some of the stuff that gives you stamina besides doing things outside. So that was really good. But that doesn't actually help her deal with what's going on or what the situation is. And if you have a great manager, hopefully they can articulate it. But sometimes they don't even really know themselves. They're just not quite ready. And Susie was kind of lamenting her woes to an older gentleman who she had met at one of the clients that she sold to. She sold Google Ads. And he said, listen, if I may be so bold, I'm just going to, I'm going to tell you something and you can decide if it helps. I think you're terrific at your job. I see you really are an advocate for Google. I know you hit your numbers. I know you are great with my client team, and you've been a good client manager for us, or client salesperson. But I do notice, Susie, that when you talk about Google and you talk about ads, but I rarely hear you mention anybody else. I can see that you're collaborative with my team, but I just wonder if I were your manager, if I would be at all concerned that you're sort of not a team player, and that if I promote you, you're going to still keep on being an individual contributor. And Susie was able to kind of take this in and think about it. And I have since gotten to know the person who was then her manager, and it was a part of it, not all of it. And she did get promoted the next time, and she's a terrific executive. But it's just a good example of where there was somebody who knew her a little bit. Like, it wasn't just the first conversation. Can you mentor me? Can I come ask you a question out of the blue? Because he wouldn't know that about her. It was somebody older where she had started to build a relationship, maybe a bit unintentionally. And he knew her a bit enough to give some comment, but was distant enough to not feel obligated to maybe like not hurt her feelings. So for me, like a couple of people on my board of directors are very senior Singaporeans. I was just talking to Bobby and Adina about it before the call. I'm on a few boards in Singapore. I work with senior Singaporean executives, but I am not Singaporean. And so there will always be, I've lived here 20 years, but there will always be things I don't understand. And so I guess same is true about Australia, even though I lived there a long time. And so I need to go to people who can explain to me what's going on, but who know me a little bit. So it's not just the first conversation, because they're like, well, I don't know the context. I don't know what you're like. I don't, so the board of directors is like, you find 5 to 6 people who have these skills and expertise that you think might be valuable to you over time, get to know them, be seriously interested in what they're doing. Don't take too much of their time, maybe a few times a year. Sometimes it won't work out. You'll try somebody, go in with a warm lead. I wouldn't say to them, you're on my board of directors. I mean, I've had people say that to me now because I've written about it, but like, it's a pretty weird, like nobody thinks about that. But anyway, that's my very impassioned pitch about mentoring, sponsorship, and boards of directors. So
I love the concept about boards of directors. And I also, a question that we often get asked is, how do you find a mentor? And taking up your point, it is a big responsibility if someone approaches you and said, I want you to be my mentor. And first, because you need to know people and understand what they need from you. But the thinking that sometimes I offer is that you can find people, when you have a specific issue or question, you can find people who might be able to help you just with that. And so that you can approach people to say, I have this question and I think you're really well placed to help me with it. Can I speak to you about that? So you're not asking them to be your mentor. You're not asking them for hours and hours of time, but what you are asking for is help with something specific. And then if that's a successful conversation, you might discover that they're open to be asked again or whatever. But it's like you don't ask someone to marry you on the first date, ideally.
I think that's exactly right. So, for example, there's another person in the book who moved from being a physio in Australia to hospital management, and so the kinds of people she talked to included people who'd done it before. And I think you're so spot on. If you go with a specific question, almost anybody will talk to you. Bobby, I'm thinking about starting my own comms firm. I know that. I mean, I'm making this up because don't worry, I'm not, and I wouldn't probably be good at it, but a marketing and firm. And I saw that you've done that, how do you do it? And that's probably too broad. But like Sue asked people, hey, I saw that you used to be a physio and you transitioned into hospital management. Why? What did you like? Or do you regret it? Are you going to go back? And because people, I think sometimes people who are asked to mentor also feel like as I said with Susie over the weekend, I don't actually know. I'm not sure I can help. But it's specific like that. I can go, sure, I did that. I moved from the US to Australia and then to Singapore. You want to ask about moving around with companies? I can tell you about it.
Yeah.
I can at least have one perspective.
I'm going to bring in a question from the chat here related, which is about introverts and extroverts and whether asking for help, how you think that's different if you're an extrovert or an introvert.
Well, so it's interesting because, probably many people on this call have done Myers-Briggs. And I did learn that although we think of extroverts as people like me who like blah, blah, blah all the time and, happy to talk to anybody, even though I still don't really love big cocktail parties, and introverts as being quiet, it's not really the main characteristic. The main characteristic is that when introverts want to recharge, they need to go sit and do something calmly. Whereas extroverts, when they want to recharge, even if they feel exhausted, a better thing for them to do is to go to their book group and be surrounded by people. So I've met a ton of capable introverts who don't present to me as being shy.
Boy or girl.
Someone in the audience needs to mute.
They've done it, Bobby. They've done it.
They've done
so,
it. Thank you.
It might be harder for if you see yourself as an introvert and you're shy and you feel that it's tough to ask. I can only encourage you by saying that many people I know ask for help a lot, and I get asked a lot. I rarely turn it down. And as Bobby said, the more specific it is, the better. I see that you've done this, and maybe, a connection. And we both used to work at, ANZ Bank. So something that tweaks, or, I think we both live in Balmain. Could you spare me? And I would even go for 15 minutes, right? Because often they go, 15's, not enough. Let's meet for quick coffee, but make it short and sharp. And then a lot of people will do, I don't know about Australia, but even in Singapore where it's, too hot for this, I have a lot of people now doing walking meetings the way Mentor Walks does. And they'll say to me, I'm not going to go, I don't want to get on VC with you, but if you come to my place, let's take a walk for half an hour. And so I think just try it and just, make sure you have your social group around you so that when somebody says no and you want to cry in your pillow, they just say, oh, that, don't worry about it, whatever. I mean, usually the worst they're going to do is say, no, I don't have time, or not answer your email. So it's kind of hurtful, but that's it. So
I think that it's actually hard for everyone to ask for help, and it doesn't matter whether you're extroverted or introverted. Most of us find it difficult, just like most of us find it difficult to walk into a room full of people we don't know. So I think there's a bit of a misconception that those things come easily for some people and harder for others. I think for most people, those things are hard, and it's a muscle that you've got to exercise, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But I think assuming for some people it's a breeze is, I think there are very few people that find asking for help an easy thing to do.
So interestingly, Bobby, I don't know if you probably can't talk and read the chat at the same time, but Talia said, what do you do if somebody asks you to be their mentor?
Yeah.
And so Talia, I'm finding this very difficult because I wrote the book and then spammed everybody I know about it, because that's the only way you can sell when you've published, and you're not like J.K. Rowling, then people are coming to me who I don't even know. So, and I don't have time. So the great thing for me is having gotten involved with Mentor Walk. So I'm like, I'm really sorry. I just don't have the capacity. I'll meet with you once if you'd like, if there's something specific you'd like to discuss, but I can't take on any more mentees. However, I know about Mentor Walks, which might be an alternative for you, not to find a lifelong mentor, but just to get some mentoring. Shouldn't mentors have a leadership skill? Well, oh, thank you, Talia. Well, I guess so, but you don't know what people are being mentored for. I mean, maybe they want to be mentored in how to fit in what we were talking about at the beginning, like their outside work and their work. And you don't have to be a leader to do that. So yeah, somebody else said mentorships don't have to be linear. Yeah, I was surprised. People have come to me for help who are like my age or older, and they're like, well, I just want to know what you're doing about this 3.0 part of life. So I'm not really ahead of them, but it's just sharing.
Aliza, I'm going to move us on a little bit because I'm
Sure.
conscious that we're going to run out of time. And I want to talk about the new workplace post the COVID pandemic and your views on whether you think the way our working lives have changed are positive and some of the things we need to consider.
I think a lot of it is positive. I'm really delighted about the flexibility, and what you mentioned before, and I especially like for women that, I think there were days when women used to, because it still often falls to women, leave at 4 to take their kid to the dentist, and everybody's looking at your chair like, why are you gone? I think that seems to be mostly out of the picture. What I'm worried about are a couple things. One is that, at least in some parts of the world, I'm not sure if it's happening in Australia, but you've probably read in the US, people have moved to other locations on the basis they can work remotely. Then the companies have said, well, cost of living is lower, so we're going to lower your pay. Apparently that's been far more women than men doing that. So it's actually hurting the progress we've made in pay parity. It also, I think the jury is still out, despite all of our verbal discussion that things have changed, that people who are around the office get noticed. There were some studies done well before COVID, like Stanford did studies with C-TRIP, where people who didn't, where they was said you can work remotely at this job, they all went and worked remotely, but the people who came in more got promoted. So I'm worried about these things for women, who are the ones who so far seem to have been doing more of remote work, less of coming in. The other thing that I'm worried about, for both the companies where I'm on the board and the younger people I see, there's a lot of stuff that does seem to happen through, I don't know if osmosis is the right word, but in person. And if people aren't coming in, it doesn't happen. So particularly in jobs that are kind of apprenticeship, I would put consulting in there, accounting, law firms, like where it's people you rise up to be partner. The things that used to kind of happen where a partner might see me in the hall and go, oh, hey, Aliza, I'm having a meeting about diamond marketing, and I know you're working on Argyle. Do you want to pop in? That's not happening. Where I might see a partner in the hallway and I say, oh, Bobby, could you just look at this to see if it looks right to you? Which I would never email the partner to say, oh, dear Bobby, could I have a 5-minute Zoom meeting with you? Oh, important, high up person for 5 minutes to look at this document. So none of that is happening. And I think people are missing it. So I'm worried about that stuff. And I'm not sure what's happening there.
Yeah, I think another consideration is that often, and particularly earlier in our careers, we learn by osmosis. We learn just by what we overhear and pick up. And we've certainly noticed in one of our businesses that people very new to the workforce, that their learnings are actually slower in a virtual world than they would be if they're in the office. And if I reflect in my own early career, I had a woman sitting next to me that I used to overhear her conversations, and the amount I learned from just hearing how she had those conversations was enormous. I modeled myself on the things that she did. So I think that it is really important to try and be around people you can learn from in an unstructured way, because we do learn. I read a statistic that 70% of your learning in early career comes from those incidental osmosis type interactions, and that's significant. I don't know if it's accurate, but it's a lot.
Sorry, I just muted myself because they're doing construction above me. So I don't want everybody to have to hear the hammering that I've got going on. But I'm really interested in the 70% stat. If you find it, let me know. But that's what I feel like, but I can't prove it yet. And I think there's still some time. But yeah, I know a young man who just changed jobs, and very specifically, he had a couple offers. One of the offers, I think there was a company he liked the most, but almost everybody was in Melbourne and he was in Sydney. And they said, well, this one other person in Sydney will have coffee with you twice a week, which he knew was unlikely to happen. And then the job he liked second best was in Sydney with 4 people in his team going in 3 to 4 days a week. And he chose that one because he recognized, at least in himself, having his prior job having been mostly remote, that he needed that to learn.
Yeah. And Aliza, I just want to finish on one final question, that for the people in this group today who are leaders, and I think we can broadly define that as anyone who's managing people, just broadly, what ideas or thoughts have you got for them on how to engage and retain their workforce in a hybrid world? What advice would you suggest?
I think this is a really important issue. I think that some leaders haven't engaged all that well in the past, even when people are in the office. But when they're not in the office, I think it's much harder to have people really engage and feel part of the culture. And when they're engaged, profits are higher. I mean, you can read all these McKinsey, BCG, whatever studies, profits are higher, retention is better, therefore you have lower cost of churn. So it is really important. I think people want to feel that they know what's going on. So communicate, maybe even more than you ever thought necessary. People want to feel respected and invested in. I think that means training to the extent the company can afford it. Feedback is very, very important. If you've never read Radical Candor by Kim Scott, great book about how to give feedback, how to think about it in ways where, even if you're scared about sort of hurting people's feelings, you can give very good, constructive, thoughtful feedback so that they can take action. I think even during the Great Resignation, which we've gone past now, and we actually, in some cases, have a lot of people, being laid off, the number one and two reasons for people leaving were still around, I don't feel my company cares about me or respects me, or I don't feel like my manager is investing in me or believes in me. Sure, people wanted higher pay when it was out there and people wanted more flexible hours, but those other two things have been constant throughout. So I think as a leader, to engage them, there's more that you can do. Shout outs, which is a public kind of thank you, town halls, communication for, across all of that. Really make sure you're giving feedback and investing.
Terrific. I once heard the term, instead of saying feedback, the term should be feed forward. And it's got a much more positive connotation, but all of us need it. All of us need to be given insights and thoughts from other people to do the best we can. Aliza, you have got the most astonishing wealth of experience and knowledge, and you are utterly generous in how you share it. I really want to thank you for being with us today and sharing your thoughts on all these issues, and also for doing such a great job leading mentor walks in Singapore. Thank you. We're at the end of our time today. There's a lot of questions coming in that we don't have time to. For those who haven't read Aliza's book, I highly recommend it. It's highly practical, case study oriented, and you'll get a lot out of it. I encourage you to come back for another mentor walk. We tape these conversations and they're available on the Mentor site on YouTube if you would like to follow up. For all of those of you that have spent the hour with us today, thank you very much for being part of this conversation, and know that you can come to Mentor Walks anytime, as many times as you like, including our virtual sessions. Thank you, everyone, and good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you are.